that fascination is the locking of their attention onto what they could become.
Right, because that's what at least that it interests me more in the sense of beauty, right?
Yes.
Where it is this sense of shrinking in front of something, in the sense feeling that you're smaller than that, and then this desire to move into it, or
contact. Imitation is a kind of internalization, a kind of being wedding yourself to someone in a profound way.
And it's a form of worship, a primary form of worship, right? Because you worship what you imitate what you worship. They're the same thing. And so, okay, well, that was fun. So shall we move to the next one?
I think so. I mean,
Okay.
I'm getting a sense of how the true, the good, and the beautiful could be potentially integrated. Because I think that's a necessary requirement for this argument. And notice how we are moving outside of, we didn't talk about true, we can talk about that later at some point. We're moving outside of sort of standard ways of talking about at least goodness and beauty here. And I think there's similar ways of doing it at truth that could actually get us back to something that
Yeah, well, it's nice to put the biological twist on it too.
I wanted to run one thing before we move on, which is that the way that I tend to think about it in terms of when we talked about the idea of the through line.
Yes,
say you have
I think that's the eidos. I think that's what the form is in Plato.
Well,
it isn't what Aristotle thought it was. It isn't just a specificity of necessary and sufficient conditions.
So would you feel comfortable with the notion that it's the manner in which the multiplicity is gathered?
It's the logos.
Right, and so it actually gathers multiplicity.
Don't listen to my words, listen to the logos that gathers them together. All things are one, right? Heraclitus.
So then what we would presume provisionally is that the thing that unites the true, the good, and the beautiful is the logos. Now, we shouldn't make the presumption of knowing that we understand what that logos is. We've got some hints about what it is, but we can't characterize it entirely. Is that a reasonable proposition in your estimation?
I think so. I think especially if we're careful to do what you did before, which is we have a dipolar way of invoking the logos. The logos is both the gathering, all right, the through lining, if I can put it that way, but it is also it is also the ontological reality that affords that happening. It's the fact that I can't exhaust it, right? No matter how far I push it. So whatever through line I have is at most a signification or a symbol of the fact that it's inexhaustible. Did that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
What do you, no, I'm not trying to understand. That the through line is the significance that it's inexhaustible in the manner in which it points up, or in the manner in which it inexhaustible like this, or inexhaustible in the
manner
sense
in which it's the fact that intelligibility between representation and actuality remains regardless of how far you push it. So that would sort of be like the notion that the universe is logical, logo-based, essentially. That we're not going to run out of that.
But it's not going to be logical in the modern sense of a complete system, even though Godel tells us
you can't reduce it to an algorithm.
Exactly. So this is what I mean by saying I don't think of the form as like a standard Aristotelian essence, at least how it's been taught to me, which is a set of necessary and sufficient conditions. Like
there's no becoming in that, is there? There's just being.
Well,
right, because becoming implies transformation of something that's algorithmic, but in a manner that doesn't escape from the logos. And I mean, I think that's how reality constitutes itself, and that's part of the solution to the scandal of induction. It's like, no, you can't predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen next, but what will happen next, despite its unpredictability, like the next note in a symphony, is still predictable.
Exactly. This is what I mean about the good. The reason why Hume couldn't deal with the problem of induction is it requires the apprehension of the good, which is the promise that this is not going to be logical identity, but nevertheless, it is going to be inexhaustibly coherent. It's going to remain beautiful, and in that sense, it's always going to be something to which you can conform.
It's not reducible to an algorithm, but that doesn't mean, well, you said it, that doesn't mean it's not habitable, doesn't mean it's not good, it doesn't mean it's not coherent.
Exactly.
Right.
And your example, the music, which John Rusin used, the musicality of intelligibility is, I think, the best way to think about it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I actually think that's why we like music.
Yes.
Because I think that music is actually the most representational art form. Because for a variety of reasons. First of all, we don't see objects, we see patterns, and we interpret some patterns as objects. So patterns are primary. Then we're looking for the harmonious interplay of patterns, and then it's not strictly a causal relationship because the music is governed by principles, but it's not formally predictable. Otherwise, it gets boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
you see that, I think, most particularly, I've experienced that most particularly with Bach's Brandenburg concertos, which have this amazing continual unfolding that's so logical, it almost appears mathematical, and yet it's unpredictable, and you don't know where it's going to go.
Exactly.
And it goes there, and you think, man, that's just right.
Yes.
So
yeah, and so you could say that about pretty much everything that exists. That is that I like the glass because it's just easy. So the idea is that there is a through line in this glass, but the through line goes through potentiality, which is indefinite. That is, I can encounter a million glasses in my life, and they will all be different.
well, that's like the realm of musical possibility.
Exactly. But they all end up being predictable to a certain extent once I grasp it. Like when I see the glass, I recognize it, but I couldn't have predicted that this is the glass that would exist. There's a kind of potentiality which is maintained within the identity of the glass, but it's inexhaustible.
Right, and when you see that, when you apprehend that, and this is Scari's point, this is being struck by beauty. You see the tree, and it's like every other tree you've seen, and yet it's not. It reminds you of the eidos. It reminds you of just what you said.
And that's love. I think that's love too. Like in love, in the sense that I've often said, love is the capacity for unity and multiplicity to exist. That's what love is, right? That is that I recognize something of you that we have in common, but I also recognize you're completely separate from me.
Oh,
And that is
And
what
then
love,
both are valued.
those both have to coexist for love to be real. It has to be separation
Well,
and
that
communion.
to give the devil his due, I would say that's the kernel of good that the diversity types are pushing. We need to recognize the utility of multiplicity. It's like, fair enough. The problem with that is, well, yeah, but where's the unity here? Where's the unity? It's all diversity. It can't be all diversity because then we're in conflict. So,
and we tend to be, the modern world tends towards radical. They tend to want to change unity to uniformity, and then have this kind of crazy exploded multiplicity. Whereas this kind of natural relationship between otherness is exactly this, both recognizing what we have in common and at the same time being kind of fascinated and attracted to that which we have.
well, you
which
think
is
about
different
the
from
reason
us.
this conversation works is because we have grounds for commonality in our understanding, but that would be sterile without the multiplicity because we would just run over the same territory. And so, we hope we aim